It was a quiet, windless night. Sarah sat alone on the couch in the dimly lit living room, her eyes glued to her phone. The dim light of the screen was the only source of light, casting faint shadows on the walls. Outside, the world was still, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves as the night breeze swept through the trees. She always enjoyed the peace of solitude, but tonight felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a strange tension she couldn't shake. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was past midnight. Normally she would be in bed by this time, but something kept her from moving. The house seemed so quiet, the shadows so deep. She shifted uncomfortably on the couch, her fingers flicking through her phone indifferently, trying to distract herself. A sudden creak echoed through the silence, the sound of old wood shifting under invisible pressure. Sarah froze, her eyes turning toward the hallway. She listened intently, trying to hear if there was anything else. Maybe it was just the house settling down. But then came another sound. This time it was a soft, muffled sound, as if something, or someone, were moving upstairs. Sarah's heart raced. She lived alone, and no one was supposed to be in the house with her. She stood slowly, her bare feet sinking into the comfortable carpet, and listened again. There was only silence now. She shook her head, trying to dismiss the noise as her imagination. But the feeling of being watched still haunted her, gnawing at the back of her mind. Reluctantly, she walked into the hallway, flicking on a few lights as she passed. The warm light from the overhead lights did little to soothe her. The shadows seemed to cling stubbornly to the corners of the house, as if refusing to be banished. She stood at the base of the stairs, staring into the darkness. The hallway above was pitch black, and the light from below barely penetrated the darkness. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to leave him, to retreat to the safety of the living room. But curiosity and fear pushed her forward. With trembling hands, she reached for the flashlight she kept in the kitchen drawer and turned it on. A thin beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the wooden steps. She began to climb slowly, her heart pounding with each creak of the old staircase. The house seemed incredibly still, as if it were holding its breath. When she reached the top, she stopped and shone the flashlight down the long, narrow hallway. Her bedroom door was slightly ajar, though she was sure she had locked it earlier. She approached cautiously, the beam of her flashlight trembling as she approached the door. With a trembling hand, she pushed the door open all the way and stepped inside. Nothing. The room was empty, just as she had left it. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn, and the dim moonlight filtered through the cracks. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, but the relief was short-lived. As she turned to leave, another sound reached her ears. A faint sound, like something scraping the ground. He was coming from downstairs. Her heart sank. She swallowed hard, gripping the lamp tightly as she made her way back down the stairs. The beam of light bounced off the walls as she hurried down, trying to convince herself that it was nothing, that she was just imagining things. But when she reached the bottom, she realized that something was wrong. It was a quiet neighborhood, far from the hustle and bustle of the city streets. A place where people rarely closed their doors, where children played in the yards until the sun went down, and where neighbors waved to each other as they passed. But there was one house that seemed different, a house that, despite its charming appearance, gave everyone an uneasy feeling. For as long as Grace could remember, the house next door had been empty. Its windows were always closed, the curtains drawn, and no one had ever seen anyone come in or out. The real estate agent had once said it was an ideal place for families, but no family had ever stayed there for long. Every few months, a new family would move in, only to move out again within weeks with no reason given. Grace hadn't paid much attention to the house until the night she found herself alone. Her parents had gone out of town for the weekend, and the house was hers. Usually, she would invite friends over, watch movies, or spend the night on her phone. But something about the quiet of the evening seemed different. It was late, well after midnight, and the silence was stifling. She sat on her bed, scrolling through her phone. But the silence in the house made her feel uneasy. The ticking of the clock seemed louder, and the hum of the refrigerator downstairs seemed strangely distant. The air felt heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Then she heard it. A faint, muffled sound, almost like footsteps. Grace froze, her phone slipping from her hands. It was coming from outside, or at least that's what she thought at first. She leaned over to the window, peering through the thin curtains, her eyes falling on the house next door. The windows, which had always been closed, were now open. All of them. Inside, dim lights flickered, as if someone had lit candles all over the house. But that wasn't possible. No one lived there. She felt a shiver run down her spine as she stared into the darkness, trying to make out any movement. A shadow passed one of the upstairs windows, if only for a second. But it was enough to make her heart beat faster. She grabbed her phone and called her best friend, Gina. "Gina, you won't believe what I'm seeing," she whispered in a trembling voice. "What's wrong?" Gina asked, exhausted from sleep. "The house next door. The empty house. There's someone inside. I saw a shadow and the windows were all open." Gina was silent for a moment before laughing softly. "Grace, maybe it's just your imagination. I always said this house scared you." Grace wanted to agree, but something deep inside her told her this was different. "No, it's real. I swear there's something off there." Gina sighed. "Well, just close your doors and go back to sleep. Maybe you're just tired." Grace hung up the phone, but sleep was the last thing on her mind. The longer she stared at the house, the more uneasy she felt. It was a cold, moonless night. A night that made everything seem more isolated, more unsettling. Inside her modest suburban home, Lily sat curled up on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through her phone. The dim light from the screen was the only light in the room, casting strange shadows on the walls. The only sounds that broke the quiet of the night were the occasional hum of the refrigerator and the creaking of the old wooden floor. The house seemed empty, very empty. Her parents had gone away for the weekend and her friends were all busy. She would have thought she would enjoy the peace. But now, sitting in the silence, she felt a strange sense of unease creeping up on her. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow darker. She glanced at the clock. It was just after midnight. Lily sighed, put her phone down, and stretched. She was being silly, she told herself. It was just a house. She had lived here her whole life. But when she got up to go to the kitchen for a glass of water, the uneasy feeling did not leave her. The house was different at night, as if it was watching her. She shook her head and dismissed the thought. The kitchen was dark, and when she stepped inside, the faint sound of wood creaking made her freeze. The sound came from upstairs. She held her breath, listening intently. For a moment, everything was silent, and she let out a nervous laugh. Maybe the old house was quieting down. She took a cup from the table and filled it with water, her eyes darting nervously toward the dark hallway that led to the stairs. Suddenly, there was another creak, louder this time. It sounded like footsteps, soft but unmistakable. A shiver ran down her spine. Lily slowly put the cup down and turned off the kitchen light, plunging the room into darkness save for the dim glow of the streetlight outside. She stood there for a moment, listening, her heart racing. Then the sound came again, the distinct thud of something moving upstairs. It couldn't be the wind. It couldn't just be the house. She tiptoed to the bottom of the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hello?" she called quietly, feeling foolish as soon as the word left her mouth. The house, as expected, did not respond. Only silence greeted her, thick and stifling. She waited, hoping for a logical explanation. Perhaps a pet. Perhaps her neighbor's cat had somehow gotten in. But there was no movement, no sound, just the oppressive silence of the house. Reluctantly, she took a few steps down the stairs, each creak under her feet sending a shiver down her spine. The hallway stretched out before her, dark and empty. The door to her parents' bedroom was slightly ajar, casting a faint darkness over the floor. She was sure she had closed it earlier. The silence was broken by another sound, this time from the attic. It was soft and dragging, like something heavy being moved across the floorboards above her. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The attic door was at the far end of the hallway, a narrow set of stairs leading up from a small, rarely used corner of the house. She had always hated the attic, with its dusty boxes and forgotten memories. It was a place of shadows and echoes. Holding her phone tightly in her hand like a lifeline, she slowly made her way down the hallway. Every nerve in her body screamed for her to turn back, but curiosity, or perhaps a sense of duty, pushed her forward. She reached the drop-down ladder that led to the attic and stared at it for a long moment.